Good evening, everybody. How we doing tonight? Yeah? Doing great? Excellent. This is such a wonderful turnout. I'm so excited to be here with each and every one of you. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. As Denise mentioned, my name is Jamila Jordan, and I am the director for the county's Office of Equity. And we are thrilled to be a co-sponsor tonight through our Community at the Table series, which is all about telling the stories and sharing the experiences of those who we don't often get to hear from. Can I get a shout out from my county family? Can you all show me some love? Where are you at in the house? You guys here? Okay, all right, a lot of people here. Excellent, excellent. Excited to have you all here. So without further ado, everybody, I know we want to get to the main show. So I am honored to welcome our wonderful speakers for this evening, Tommy Orange and Greg Saris. We are here tonight to celebrate Tommy Orange's brand new book, Wandering Stars. It launched just this week. So you're among the very first to read this compelling story. Tommy Orange is the author of the breakout bestseller, There, There, his already classic first novel, which the New York Times Book Review described as pure, soaring beauty. There, There has received many accolades, including an American Book Award. His new book, Wandering Stars, is a beautiful follow-up to There, There. Mr. Orange extends his constellation of narratives into the past and future, tracing the legacies of the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 and the Carlisle Indian Industrial School through 3 generations of a family. It's a story that is by turns shattering and wondrous, piercing in its poetry, sorrow and rage, and a devastating indictment of America's war on its own people. Tommy Orange is a graduate of the MFA program at the Institute of the American Indian Arts. He's an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma and was born and raised in Oakland, California. All right, all right, all right. I'm excited to share as well that facilitating tonight's conversation is author and scholar Greg Saris. Mr. Saris is serving his 16th term as chairman of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria and his first term as board chair for the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. His many publications include Keeping Slug Woman Alive, Grand Avenue, and How a Mountain Was Made. His new literary collection, The Forgetters, debuts in April. We are in for a truly fascinating, inspiring, and touching evening tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce Tommy Orange and Greg Saris. Let's welcome them to the stage.
So, hi, Tommy, how are you? Welcome, everybody. Good evening. It's my honor and pleasure to talk to Tommy Orange tonight about his wonderful new book. Yes, I was going to whisper in his ear, my God, Oakland got so much applause. Anyway, to begin, I know a lot of you, I've got some questions here from the audience, and perhaps there'll be time for more. But before we get going, I want to give Tommy a chance to select a portion of his novel to read to you so you can get a sense of the flavor of the book and just hear him. It's wonderful to hear, I know Tommy read, but authors read. And so, Tommy, do you want to take it away? He's waving to somebody.
Somebody's waving to me. I don't know who it is, but
We could all just start waving, Tommy. Pretty soon, all those hands will look like stars.
Thank you, Greg. I especially appreciate the heads up here. So this is what I'm going to read right now is a spoiler if you haven't read There. It's an alert, I guess, as they say, and I'm sorry. That's what I'm going to read. I think I don't say the character's name because it's written in the first person. So I may have just unnecessarily spoiled a thing that wouldn't have been spoiled if I didn't say that. Now you're going to be looking for clues, like how is this a spoiler? Because I just realized I don't actually say his name.
And it should make you curious to read the book, I might add.
It's too late. You'll know if you read it. And if you haven't read it, you won't know. And so it's not spoiled. It's actually not spoiled. This sounds insane. Okay. Chapter 16. The only thing alive. A bad thing doesn't stop happening to you just because it stops happening to you. In therapy, this is called trauma. Opal had me doing therapy twice a week, individual and group, to make sure I had the help I needed if I needed it. That was how Opal put it to me, and that I had to go. Opal was over careful about not saying that I needed therapy. Of course I needed it. But it was more like I had to go, like the way I always had to go to school and had to get good grades. Go, get. Don't give anyone an excuse to leave you behind, to not see you, to forget you're there. Opal averaged 10 miles a day on her mail route. So if anyone knew about not getting left behind, it was her. We would not let what happened be the reason I get behind in school, even though school hadn't even started yet. Opal said we would rise above what happened because bad things happening to you were opportunities, ways to find out who you were, find out what else couldn't keep you down, and were the only way you could find out how strong you really were. Opal got too positive after the powwow. It wasn't like her. She'd always been so real. Positive thinking sounds stupid. But I get it. I just hated that what happened had changed her, had changed everything. Hated it so much that some days I wished the bullet had killed me. So I needed therapy. Obviously, I needed therapy. I'd gotten shot while I was dancing. That was some fucked up shit to have happened. But there was more I should have been to therapy about before. My whole childhood with my mom before she died. Nobody wants to be told they need therapy, just like nobody wants to be told they got problems. Paid therapy felt better to me than some kind of free or court-mandated kind. Plus, the therapist was supposedly native. Opal had found him on the internet. He'd said his grandmother was a full-blooded Arapaho. He looked white to me. And then sometimes not. Sometimes he seemed hella Indian, like in what he said and the way he said it, like how what Opal said could sometimes seem to come from a long time ago. And you just knew it was some hard-won wisdom passed down to her, something simple and timeless that you could actually use in your life. I'd heard the word trauma before. Everyone knows the word trauma. But when I heard it used about me, I didn't like it. All of the work we'll be doing together will be related to your trauma response, Dr. Hoffman said in our first session. The 4 F's, he said. There are 4 kinds of trauma responses, 2 of which you've probably heard of, fight and flight. But the 2 other less known responses are freeze and fawn. Fawn? Isn't it like a deer, I said? And a yawn escaped Dr. Hoffman's mouth, which he visibly tried to suppress by putting his fist to his nose and sort of squeezing his face like it was also a fist, after which he didn't fully yawn, but did that yawn version of throwing up in your mouth. It has to do with taking care of other people's feelings and putting their feelings before your own. We will address all forms of trauma response in our healing work, Dr. Hoffman said. I didn't think healing and work belonged together like home and work didn't. And it felt like homework thinking about doing healing work. But the healing work just ended up being art therapy, like drawing and painting and drumming and writing, learning to reframe my story with writing. Dr. Hoffman wanted me to write what he was calling an autobiography, which I told him I didn't want to write. We did physical stuff, meant to express or exercise my pain or emotions. Once we did a walking meditation around Lake Merritt, and that felt like it took forever. Another time we went up to the hills and shot an arrow with a bow at some paper targets taped to a redwood. Calling it archery in the end wasn't enough to make it feel okay to be native and shooting a bow and arrow in the woods for therapy, but I had to admit it was kind of fun, and I wanted to get good at shooting the bow and arrow, as if it were some test I needed to pass, as if I should just know how, like that knowledge should just be in my DNA. The craziest thing we did was called reverse speech therapy. Dr. Hoffman recorded me saying stuff in our sessions, then processed it with something he called backmasking, which was just playing it in reverse from what I could tell. Dr. Hoffman said the backmasked version was my unconscious speaking in reverse simultaneously as I consciously set things forward. You're saying, wait, so what are you saying? I asked. And Dr. Hoffman laughed and coughed, a cough that seemed caused by the laughter. You're saying whatever I say, some other part of me is saying another thing, but it can only be heard if I listen to it backward? Your unconscious is a powerful, powerful part of you, Dr. Hoffman said. I didn't like how he'd said powerful twice in a row like that. But it also felt like Dr. Hoffman's unconscious was why he said it twice in a row. All humans have this ability, Dr. Hoffman cleared his throat, then pointed at his throat, saying, double speaking is natural for our vocal cords and true to the dual nature of reality. Think of all the ways the world is split in two, night and day, sleeping and waking, life and death, good and evil, noise and silence, darkness and light. As he spoke and repeated these opposites to illustrate his point, he kept flipping his palm so it faced up and then down. The unconscious way of speaking is closer to poetry, and the conscious one is closer to prose. Yeah, but that's like saying everybody has some split personality, I said. If we don't acknowledge the unconscious, which is what it wants, then we allow it to run the show, as in dreams or worse, nightmares, and we never wake up to who we are as a whole. Are you talking about being woke? I said, kind of trying to be funny. I'm talking about seeing the mind as being more than we think we know it to be. One recorded clip had me saying, I really don't think I'm doing that bad. And then when I heard it backward or backmasked, it sounded like gonna nod, might nod, delirious. I didn't think it meant anything then, but later, way later, something I couldn't even see the start of then, when I was actually nodding out from too many pills, that phrase ended up messing with me. Like, did some part of me somehow know what was coming? Group therapy was just talking circles with other kids who I thought probably had to be there, like they were court mandated. At least that's what their faces said, like when's this shit gonna be over? But then maybe my face said that too. In group sessions, Dr. Hoffman would always do most of the talking before anyone else, to explain why the talking mattered in talking circles, like everyone could just kumbaya their way back from trauma. It's important to voice things, to sound them out, like the way we learn to spell by slowly saying words. We have to sound out our stories, and they they may come out slow and clumsy, and we may misspell them, so to speak, at first, when we first go to try, which is to say, we may misunderstand them. But as we frame and reframe them, our own stories, the ones we tell each other and tell ourselves about what happened to us and what it means in the context of our lives and the bigger life we're a part of, the better we can understand what it all means, the more sure and purposeful our steps forward will become, the more informed our decisions will be. It's just as important for you to hear yourself speak your stories as it is for others to hear you speak them, so that you can come to know that you're not alone and more the same as the person sitting next to you than you are different from them, which you never would have known or believed unless they opened their mouths to share their stories here in these circles. One thing I want you to understand is that your suffering does not make you special. There's a voice inside everyone who suffers that says, no one else has it like this. And so much selfish action comes from listening to that voice. You are not alone. You are not special. And there's hope. We have one another. I'll stop there. You probably want to come.
So much in that young man's voice. Tommy, before we go on, I'd be remiss if I nobody did a land acknowledgement here. And I'm not a fan of land acknowledgements. I often feel that they're a sales receipt for genocide and stolen land. But many of my folks from my tribe, the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, are here. We're the descendants of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok of the land that you're on here. And I know my former vice chair who worked with me for 28 years, I believe it is Laurel Ross is here and others. So welcome all of folks from my nation. Thank you for coming. And I know Tommy's grateful and we're all grateful. So grateful to be here, which is a lot about what the book's about. Ultimately, a wonderful book. We kind of start, Tommy, with the questions that a lot of people would want to ask, and particularly hearing just this slice that you read, and then again, the writer-type questions that you will get. What inspired you to write the book? There's the historical section, and then I know you probably are so tired of the questions of the sequel, prequel, sequel, all of that's kind of stuff, so I'm not going to say that. I just said it. But do you want to just talk a little bit about the genesis, the seed of this, in addition, obviously, to our own lives?
Yeah, I mean, it is a strange. So I grew up with very religious parents. My mom was an evangelical Christian. My dad was a roadman in Native American church. They instilled in me, like, God is the most important thing. When I asked them when I was 6, like, about a girl I had a crush on, they were like, what does she believe in? And I'm like their conversation, like, veered me toward, like, the idea about religion. So this book comes from a very strange place. I did not intend to write a sequel. It's sort of like a Marvel Universe word, and, like, do I hate myself so much that already, like, doing a sophomore effort, if I had a big success, do I hate myself so much I'm gonna write a sequel thing on the next book? I guess so. And but I was in a warehouse north of Baltimore, March of 2018, before There came out. Before There became a big hit. And the sales reps were helping me to sign 5,000 books. And they wanted to make it fun, and they played a Spotify playlist based on the root station of There by Radiohead. And Wandering Star by Portishead came on. And for whatever reason, I'll never know why, in that moment, while signing books, this is not a romantic scene for, like, to inspire writers. Like, I'm not like, like on some getaway or residency or like, grinding it out before work in a like cool writing basement space. Like, this is like the most unlikely writing space to think of an idea, the most unrelatable to other writers. Like, well, you were signing 5,000 books of the book that's about to come out when you thought of the next book. It's annoying as a story to relay, but I'm telling you the truth. This is where the idea for this book started. Wandering Star by Portishead came on, and immediately I knew I was going to write a sequel, and it was going to be called Wandering Stars. And the reason I would even tell this story, because it's embarrassing, is because there were all of these weird signposts along the way that made the decision for the title of the book make sense. So, for instance, a year later, I was in Sweden for the translation of There, and they invited me to a museum. And I normally don't like museums, but they're like, "We have your people's stuff. Like, don't you want to see it?" I'm like, "I do and I don't." And they give me this meta tour of like, "We know it's wrong, like the history of museums having the stuff, but like, we want to let you know that it's wrong, and that we have your stuff, and like, you should see it, and also you should know that we know that it's wrong, that we have your stuff while you see it." Yeah. Makes sense? But while I was there, I saw a newspaper clipping of Southern Cheyennes in Florida in 1875. And I knew enough about my tribe's history to know that we were never in Florida. And like, who should be if they don't have to be? No real shade on Florida. But really. So I fell down this rabbit hole of history. Like, I found out basically through this history, the origin of the boarding school system in this country started. Half of the prisoners of war in Florida were Southern Cheyennes. That's my tribe. I'm enrolled in the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, but everyone in our tribe knows if you're Southern Cheyenne or if you're Arapaho. There's no mistaking it. My dad has been very clear since I was very young. We are not Arapaho. No shade on Arapahos if there's any of you in the audience. But, these names of tribes get put together or we're not federally recognized. And this is all like this weird naming thing that is a whole different conversation. But I found out about this thing. And this is a very long answer, and I apologize. But the book took on this historical dimension because I found out that my tribe was basically a sort of wicked seed for the boarding school system. 1875 to 1878 half of the prisoners of war at the prison castle in St. Augustine, at the very first European colony in the United States. That was it was Fort Marion, it was St. Augustine. That was the very first European colony. You know, we grew up hearing Plymouth and Jamestown, and this idea that Columbus discovered America while he was in the Caribbeans. Like, if somebody came from the Caribbeans to try to become part of our country, it'd be like, you're an immigrant. And that's where somehow also Columbus discovered this country that none of it makes, it's an absurd history that we try to, all that we teach to schools is Indians as it relates to Pilgrims 400 years ago. So anyway, finding out about this prison castle, I don't mean to sound, I sound a little bit manic, I know, because I'm jumping around. But I mean to say, like, the importance of understanding that the prison castle was the first European colony in the United States. And they took, for reasons that I'll never understand, prisoners of war from Oklahoma, Cheyenne, southern Cheyenne, Arapaho, Caddo, Kiowa, all the way to Florida to be in a prison castle for 3 years, Christianized them, militarized them, and then sent them back to Oklahoma. And then Pratt, thinking it was such a successful campaign, was like, let's do it to all the Indian children everywhere. And that was done for almost 100 years. And it devastated our people. It devastated our people and our culture and our connection to language. And this is something that does not exist in the institution of education about this country. And so it's a very long way to answer your question about, like, what I'm writing about here and what I'm talking about.
And it gets to the question of lost. I want to come back to that and what the boarding schools did. And incidentally, my grandmother was in Sherman along with her sister, and they took them on the train from here down to Sherman. But you mentioned not knowing and this certain histories and the things that people don't know. And one of the things you mentioned in your novel that was heartwarming to me is one of your characters being in school and learning about California Indians, as we all did around here in 4th grade, building missions with popsicle sticks. We had sugar cubes. I mean, it was even sweeter in my time, so, But, and then, of course, but the question is, what happened to them afterwards? We just disappeared. I guess sucked a popsicle to eternity or something. But so, again, one of the things that is so important in the novel and about American Indian people writing is telling histories. I'm always, as I'm sure you are, and people have asked me about your prologue, but I'm always amazed at what people don't know. And as I like to say, the American Indian is the prick in the American conscience. Americans can say, well, slavery was wrong, but we got rid of it. Of course, never mind the legacy of slavery. And they'll say immigrants chose to come here, never mind the reasons they chose to come here. But how do you tell and erase a story of genocide and theft? That's a tough one for them. So the best way is take our kids, make them forget this so that they can forget it in turn. And what you have written and done here, Tommy, is showing that history of your people, and then the erasure and the dislocation, which is one thing, but the way in which lives are affected generationally because of this. The notion of wandering stars, and Jude Starr, the lead character, the first character here, quotes something from the Bible about wandering stars being, lost in darkness forever. And you mentioned the Cheyenne and people in Oklahoma. They'd already been removed once from their homelands and pushed there, and then they take the kids or the people there and take them clear across the country, in some cases back from where they marched them from, right? And imprison them. And the boarding school thing kept happening, and yet the trauma and all of these things that people don't really want to talk about has been what we have endured, as you said with your characters, the weight. And I wanted to talk about that little bit, about that displacement, because the displacement from place becomes the erasure of identity and history for Indian people, because we've always been tied to a place. What's the best way to undo us is take us from home. And we've been wandering in many ways ever since. As I say about my own people here, we were decimated in place, and we've been made strangers in our homeland. And the trauma of that and what happens, do you want to, I'm sure it's all of your characters here are reckoning with that, surviving that, enduring that in various ways. And it's very personal for me because I've seen it in my own family. Trauma becomes almost cultural. As I like to say in my family, things could be going really well, but that feels uncomfortable. So we got to have somebody create a drama so that we're all going crazy again. And I see that in some of your characters. I mean, that's kind of what we do. Do you want to speak again? You're so brave, Tommy, to delve into that. It's hard. It was personally, I don't know how for other readers, but I think for a lot of Indian people, that's hard to read, not meaning difficult, but emotionally resonant from what we live and have seen. And obviously, you know that. So do you want to, pretty brave. You could have just written a history about, they went on a train and they went here and, wasn't Pop Warner great? The winning most football team by young men who were enslaved in Carlisle. Let's just remember that. So talk a little bit about this, Tommy.
And Jim Thorpe, I think
there's
a Jim Thorpe movie coming. He was an amazing athlete.
Perhaps, along with Muhammad Ali, the best American athlete, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Sack and Fox guy.
So, going out with there, and having discussions with readers, and I'm just starting this new part of that. Writing fiction is completely it's a communal relationship with readers. And at some point when I was in my MFA, I realized I'm not just writing because I want to write, and I think I'm some kind of this is important unto itself, because I came to a place where I was like, this is a meaningful experience for there to be books and there to be readers, and people who come to events like this, and people who organize things that there can be spaces like this, are people who understand the importance of the writer and the reader and the deep relationship. And Native people have had very little space in that relationship. And writing there and having a great reception, and now Wandering Stars, I feel so honored, and I feel so special because I have so many writer friends who don't have that going on. But the Native story is, it's so bereft, and it's very hard to feel, even with like TV shows like Reservation Dogs and Lily Gladstone nominated for an Oscar, and you've been working for more than 20 years and talking about California Native stories. Like, you know the heartbreak of the attention does not last. So it can be very hard to find a way to write into to work, to keep working, to feel like the attention, while we briefly have it, means something. It can be hard to not be jaded, and I don't want to be, and I don't feel that I am. And I'm 3 days out from my newest book, and it got good reviews, and I don't want to sound like, the wrong way, but we have probably 6 Native American renaissances. That means 5 probably deaths of interest in us. Because for there to be a rebirth in interest, there has to be the death. And most people who look at the representation of themselves in popular culture, there wasn't a dying off ever. You just take for granted that you see some representation of yourself in popular culture. And Greg had an HBO miniseries on HBO in the 90s. There was a lot of reason to hope at a moment. But we continually, as a culture, as an American people, fail to care about the Native American story. And I don't want to sound angry, and I don't want to sound bitter, and I don't want to sound resentful, but it's just a fact. And so I feel suspicious about this new moment. And I wonder how you feel.
Thank you, Tommy. You're a good friend, and thank you for seeing this. I remember when we were making Grand Avenue, after we made it, and that, by the way, I should tell you that I'd gone to Sundance, and I had the script, and everybody there was telling me I was going to be, the next greatest writer, and they got me these fancy agents, and I went around with the script in Hollywood, and they said, you're a really good writer. Why are you writing? Can you do something lighter about not these people? I said, the Indians, in other words, are too dark. Of course, they said, no, that's not what we meant. Of course, that's what they meant. And so the script ended up at Sundance, or HBO, and of course, that being the premiere house, I know you were there for a while, you kind of just bow down and wait for them to read the script or whatever. And I got frustrated, and I just called Redford up. And I said, well, if I'm going to be so famous and I'm so great, and I've been kicking around this thing for 8 months in Hollywood, why don't you do something and say you'll executive produce it? And Tommy, it wasn't me, it wasn't the good writing or anything or the subject. It was Redford calling up and saying, I'll put my name on it. We had a contract the next day. Yeah, that's how it went. Of course, then they wanted Cher in it, and I had to resort to gang warfare. Can you imagine her coming down or driving down the the car from the Res singing Half Breed? I don't think so. But in any event, I had to resort to gang warfare and bring folks, producers and all them up to the reservation and, see my aunts. We never say our Indian women are fat, they're powerful. And so I have powerful aunties up there, and as they said, look at us, we ain't Cher. And we had Sheila Tausey end up playing that. But it was a battle, Tommy, and it's going to keep being a battle that we're going to have to fight, because these producers kept saying, doesn't this woman, she's got these kids from different guys and she's alcoholic, and, why doesn't she want her daughter to take piano lessons or all of that? Or get counseling? I said, counseling, piano lessons? She's trying to figure out how to get McDonald's on the dinner table that night. Anyway, it's a constant battle. And after we did Grand Avenue and it was done, the Nielsen's come in. It's all about money, as you'll see. And they said, oh, HBO, you made a mistake. Nobody's going to watch this except Greg and his mother. And as it turned out, we were the second most highly rated miniseries of the season. Cher beat us with If These Walls Could Talk. But, if there's going to be a third world war, there's two things that'll survive, rats and Cher. But in any event, they also were very happy about the ratings and all of that. And I got all these contracts to write all these other things. And then again, Tommy, what happens is interest fades and people keep saying, nobody's really interested. Indians don't sell. It doesn't make money. Red's Dogs was a great show. But as soon as there's not money or a big viewership, or as you were just saying, Tommy, a lack of interest in our stories, or a seeming lack of interest, especially with, MBAs that are development people in these big houses from Harvard, they say, oh no, we're not going to take a chance on this. We have to work together. And those of us, we have a casino, we just gave $4 million to Sundance to develop Indian stories just about us. And we're going to have to take this and get together and push this. We can be our own truck. That's what it's going to take, Tommy.
Thanks.
I'm getting old. You guys got to get up there and keep doing it. But that's what it's going to take. My experience has really shown me that you're right. If we don't keep slogging and get up there, we'll lose it again. I was out there, and right after that, smoke signals and everything was high. And Tommy, until Res Dogs, that's 20 years.
It's a valley.
So I'm hoping that they're there and the novels that are coming out and these kinds of things will get made. And as you said, I thank the audience and these people for caring and reading this relationship with us. As I used to say to my students when I leave every day, it's not a sin to think. So I'm so grateful. And Tommy, I want to talk about something else, though, before we go, and that's the big thing that everybody brings up. I know I'm bringing up the touchy subjects that the interviewers and your reviewers don't really talk about and a lot, and that's the thing that they're because they don't know whether to say Indian or Native American. Oh, I don't want to say Indian, that's bad. Of course, we say Indian to one another, but they say, well, you can say that, Greg, but we can't. I say, you can say whatever you want. But the question of identity and who's Indian and who's not, and your character in there, Sean, who is adopted and finds the DNA. And that brings up the question, now, it seems like it's somewhat popular and in some cases lucrative to be Indian. The question comes up is, what is Indian? Do you have DNA? And I kind of hate the idea of how much blood you have, as if that presupposes point of view. Like if you have so much Indian blood in you, suddenly you're going to want to go out and shoot Bambi or something. So you really deal with that. The ancestor of the Oakland folks, Victoria, she didn't even know she was Indian until much later in her life, and had to kind of learn and get associated with that. And again, that's the ultimate displacement. Luckily, she got that connection and learned, but how many of us don't? And so what does that mean? Do you have to be enrolled to be a real Indian? All these things imposed upon us that are, I feel, Tommy, and I wanted your opinion on this, because you talk about this a lot in the book. It's a continuation of colonization. And then sometimes we do it to one another, where we delegitimize those within our own ranks, which is a hassle. People always say to me, you don't look Indian. And I always say, of course, you don't look rude. But, what's an Indian supposed to look like? Anyway, these questions come up, and being in Oakland and your characters realizing and they're Indian people, and then even not realizing or forgetting that they're on Indian land, all those things. Thank you for bringing that up in your novel. It helps people understand. But talk about that whole idea, if you've dealt with that thing as a how can you be Cheyenne when you grew up in Oakland, for instance? What kind of Indian is that? They always say to me, well, you must be into nature. And I said, well, if you're breathing, you're into nature. But talk about that a little bit, Tommy, because that's a tough subject. And it's a touchy one that people, non-Indians, don't know how to broach.
Yeah.
And you really broached it in your novel.
Yeah, I think in both books I go into this idea of what would it be like if you have a legitimate claim, but you don't know how to get there. So, it's and there's a lot of annoying interview questions that begin with who are you? Are you Orville? Did you find your culture on the internet? Immediately, they want the book to be about I don't have a connection to my own culture.
Right.
And
they were assuming because you grew up in Oakland? Oh, Christ.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, I'm in a Catholic place. Go ahead.
So my dad is one of the 5 living Southern Cheyenne speakers of the language left. His first language was Cheyenne, and we grew up knowing it fully.
Yeah.
I was never what am I? Let me look on the internet because I heard a story from my mom. That's not people of color in general and Native people are often, when we're being criticized or looked at critically about the stuff we write about, the idea is well, what part of it is you? Because you couldn't have made this up.
Yeah.
It has to be something
Did you research this?
Barely. More so, it's what's the parts that are you?
Yeah.
And it's really insulting because the craft questions are people that are not in this category, people of color, white men specifically, can make up this crazy world and will never be asked where did this come from in your own personal experience?
Yeah. How did you know this? Yeah.
So we're asked to authenticate ourselves. But I wrote this whole 2/3 of the book about a character addicted to opioids in the midst of an opioid crisis in this country. And that's not my experience. But every interview I've had, people are saying well, what is your experience with it? Immediately, I'm writing nonfiction. And also in the realm of identity, well, what is your actual amount of Native Americanness?
Yeah, I get that.
And so we've come a long way in the publishing industry and in the world of the way we think about the books that we read and the books that we talk about. But a lot of people here have probably watched American fiction. The book Erasure by Percival Everett is even more powerful. In the realms of the way that the general reader, and I don't mean to alienate anyone here at all, but the way that we talk about the worlds that we write about, the way that the general reader, the discussion is really problematic most of the time. And it's a really difficult thing to find a way to talk outside of something that's just placating this idea that, like, you know, Greg, you've been doing it for so many years. The view of, like, the outside view of what it is.
At you all the time.
Yeah, and the inability to have a real dialogue. Because the outside view continues to be, look how interesting these people are, as opposed to, look at these other humans that are part of this human experience. This sort of gawking, you know.
I think that a lot of the reason I wrote too fiction is I wanted people to see us as not things or an idea, but complicated human beings negotiating the same kinds of things here and now that other people negotiate.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have different paths and stuff. Of course, there's a flippant side of me, Tommy, coming up. There's the flip side where people will come up to you and want to authenticate themselves and say they have the grandmother that's Indian. Of course, she's always Cherokee. And they go on and on about that to me. And then I always listen politely. And I said, well, that's fascinating. I have a mother who is white, you know, to undo these ideas that somehow, I mean, we're people. And a lot of us have felt, because of history and colonization, this internalized illegitimacy. And these things, Tommy, at least for me, are a continual challenge for me to deal with that illegitimacy that I have felt since a child, really young. And so I think the writing is, and when I read what you've done, and others will read, I'll go, there, you see, that gives language to what is this life.
Thank you.
So, I think that's why I would argue, any good writer should do what he or she or they write about. And so I think that's, you know, truly, truly important. But so I thank you. And that's it's been, I knew that coming to see you tonight after reading this book, because I kept thinking, oh my God, I kept thinking of my father, my family, and lots of that stuff. One of the things, and I'll ask you this, and maybe folks are curious, my family, when Grand Avenue came out, they were all going to sue me because I was writing about them. Of course, none of them had read the book, but they heard about the stories I was telling. And then once they saw the movie, they understood the concept of representation, and then they were all famous and movie stars, because some of them were in there, and I said, go around, sign autographs if you feel good. But then others said, well, you're hanging out all our laundry for people to see. That's what I got. Have you had that kind of?
Not so much. I with there, I've done a bunch of storytelling work and made a point to not write about real lives and did imaginary stuff. With this book, I go into history and then into the imaginary lives of the original people. From there, the story of right now, if I'm being completely honest with a lot of strangers and you, my family and me right now are a complete mess. I would never write anything related to my family right now. I'm also helping a dear, dear friend deal with a legal case related to her problems with not even writing about her family, just being a part of her family. So I feel for that experience, but I'm like just trying to survive my family right now.
Which we do. As I said to Tommy backstage, there's some talking to folks, and I said, how would you like to be a tribal chairman? Because then you're a family of over 1,000, and and I'm related here as to probably, I don't know, a third of the tribe. And so the other thing, Tommy, that happens to me is when I write something they like or do something they like, I'm everyone's cousin. And then when I do something they don't like, I'm white. So, and they're right. I mean, so you're kind of in a fortunate situation. You can kind of step back and take a breath. But yeah, and our families, these things go on. And they're heartbreaking. The opioid and fentanyl stuff that's going on among the young people, the meth, the crystal meth, is one of the things that really put a lot of the young people over the edge, and has created some really hard stuff. But at the end, as we I know our time's going, and there's some people may have questions. The end of this, it's the beautiful story at the end of Loney when he writes a letter home after he's been away. He wants to come home to a family. And I think, Tommy, that is what you and I and all people, Indian and otherwise, ultimately want to do, is somehow come home. I'm getting she's cutting us off, Tommy.
Thank you so much, Greg and Tommy. We could have listened for hours and hours, and then we'd get kicked out of the building. It would be a problem. But this was such a touching and beautiful conversation, and I'm honored that I was able to be part of it. Did you want to have a couple questions? We've got a minute or two.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
The worst one.
Oh, you've already got
I mean,
them
the
there.
best one.
Yeah, so I'll ask a couple of them, and I don't know, the audience, this one is the one that kind of was interesting. What is something that is bringing you delight, or what would you encourage an aspiring writer to read? There's two distinct questions there on one page.
Okay, so I recently started watching the Vince Staples show on Netflix.
Yeah.
That brought me delight. And I also I reread for like the 6th time or 7th time Clarice Lispector's Hour of the Star. So it's a read thing and a delight thing. And if you don't know about Vince Staples, go listen to all of his stuff. He's amazing. If you don't like rap, then I don't care about you.
It won't delight them then.
Great. And,
What would
it's
you encourage in, and this is one what would you encourage an aspiring writer to read? Well, I guess you just.
This is Out of the Star by Clarice Lispector.
Okay. As high school English teachers, what advice would you give us in teaching there to high school students?
I think I've had enough experience with high school teachers and teachers who have taught there, luckily. It's writing exercises around the book that they're reading if you're teaching it, because the way that so much of the way that we teach writing in institutions is the death of writing. It's the death of voice. It's this idea of like, make your statement, have a theory, have a conclusion. Like, that's the death of the voice of like somebody thinking they can say something that is from them. It's like a mathematical calculation from the throat that makes no sense. Like, so thinking of ways to interact, not necessarily even with there specifically, but if it is there, like, what are ways that you can just give prompts that, like, how does this chapter start? Do this to yourself. Like, use a prompt from a book they're already engaged with to have them write their own chapter. At 1,000 words, have them write for 15 minutes and get out 1,000 words. I think that can be really helpful to giving them their connection to their voice and to writing back from what they're inevitably going to get across the board, which is like, this is what writing is, in this very robotic, like, horrible way. In so many other places, but you have an opportunity to do it in a cool way. If you're teaching, books that you care about and that they care about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.